June 15th, 1944. 0217, a remote farmhouse clinging to the side of a wet hill in the Maquis, central France. You arrive in the dark, with mud in your boots and the taste of wind and ash under your tongue. Lantern light leaks through shutter slats in rectangles, throwing the stone walls into soft squares of shadow. Inside, the air is hot and metallic. Sweat, disinfectant, and the faint sour tang of old bandages. Men lie on straw pallets, uniforms muddied, faces smeared with the black of engine oil or the red of blood. Somewhere beyond the trees, the distant thunder of artillery rolls like the ocean. Close at hand, the sharper percussion of a mortar barrage rattles the shutters. She moves through this room like a calm storm. Nancy Wake, hair pinned back in a quick chignon, a wool coat folded over one arm despite the heat, kneels beside a stretcher and doesn't look up when someone calls her name. Her hands, white-knuckled under surgical gloves that have seen better days, tie a tourniquet with an economy that speaks of practice. A young Maquis, his jaw peppered with stubble, bites down on a strip of rag as she works. His eyes find hers and holds them, not with a plea, but with a question. "Will I fly?" She answers without a smile, not evasive, but factual. "We'll try." There is a clipped rhythm to everything, the hiss of a Primus stove boiling water for sterilizing instruments, the small metallic click when the field syringe is cocked, the rustle of maps and the whisper of a wireless set buried behind a burlap sack, its dial glowing faintly like a watchful insect. In the corner, an SOE wireless operator, gaunt, hair plastered to his forehead, listens to a scratchy transmission from London and scribbles coordinates on a scrap of paper. "Drop zone confirmed. Grid Kilo 7, moonrise at 0250, he mutters, the words a prayer and an order. Nancy doesn't just listen. She translates. She's the artery between the battered men in the bunks and the faraway engines that can bring them weapons and medicine. Her voice is low but steady when she reports to the operator. "Tell them we need ammunition for 2 sections and explosives for sabotage on the road at the ravine. No air cover until so 3:15, understand?" In this room she is many things at once. Nurse, spy, commander, conscience. Every motion is rehearsed for speed. She dabs a wound with iodine, then, without pause, pulls a pair of boots from beneath a cot and shifts them to the foot of another stretcher. She knows the names of the men on the pallets, not because she's sentimental, but because names keep people real when the rest of the world insists on turning them into numbers. She moves from Alphonse to Marcel to Pierre, as if ticking items off an urgent list. Outside, the rain begins as a fine mist, beading on the dark leaves and then spitting harder, a rhythm that seems to match the ticking of a pocket watch someone forgot to wind. Dogs stir somewhere in the yard. The farm's outhouse door slams once in a gust. The sounds of the night are unremarkable and intimate. They are also the sounds of danger closed in on all sides. The Gestapo have a name for her, a whispered, exasperated nickname that has spread through occupied France like a rumor. La souris blanche, the white mouse. They call her that because she is small, because she slips through roadblocks, because she vanishes when they think they have her. They call her that because she laughs when a German officer storms a town and finds only a market stall and an old woman with a basket. They call her that because she once walked past a Gestapo checkpoint with flour on her apron and a bundle of forged papers tucked in a bread basket. But here, in the oil-slick light of this farmhouse, there is none of the show. She dresses wounds and counts pallets. She issues orders. Yes, and she kills the occasional man when circumstances leave no other option. But she prefers to stitch rather than shoot. The steel at her hip is a tool as much as the needle and thread. Tonight she wears a service revolver in a leather holster under her coat. The butt is well worn, polished by her hand. Tucked into her belt are also a small torch, a pocket compass, and a crumpled photograph of a man whose features are half obliterated by time and grime. When she has a minute, she touches it, briefly, the way a person touches a talisman. A knock at the outer door cuts across the murmured conversations. Silence snaps. Someone fingers a rifle, and there's a slipping of boots on the threshold. Nancy moves like a shadow to the door and peers through a gap in the shutters. Two figures stand silhouetted, not Germans, but local farmers, faces worried and wet with rain. One of them carries a child swollen with fever. Nancy swings the door wide with a brusque, "In!" There is no ceremony. The child is placed on a pallet near the stove, and Nancy has already reached for a thermometer. Her hands are not the only hands at work. Around her, the resistance is a mosaic of ages and backgrounds. A former school teacher who can't bear the sight of blood but can pass a coded message under fire. A baker who serves as runner between villages. An old priest who hides false identity papers beneath the floorboards of his chapel. Young men stolen from farms who now know how to prime grenades and steer a stolen lorry. She is their linchpin, not because she is the most decorated or the most trained, but because she moves between their worlds with uncanny ease. From the gentleness of a makeshift dressing table to the cold calculation of sabotage plans. Later, as the rain eases and the night darkens further, she will walk the perimeter in a heavy wool coat, barefoot in places where the stones are warm from the day. She carries a torch and a rifle. She listens to the earth as if it speaks. She has been through Gestapo interrogations, narrow escapes, and long runs across country roads that sting her feet with bramble and frost. She knows how to read the countryside, which hedges give good cover, where carts leave predictable ruts, which fields have foxholes buried like teeth beneath the soil. She has been shot at and has shot back. She has buried friends in secret places. She has laughed at danger because laughter keeps fear from boiling over. Inside, the radio operator finishes his message and hands the scrap to Nancy. Her eyes scan it quickly. Drop will be north of the ravine at grid K7. Window opens at 02:55 and closes at 03:05. She counts seconds in her head like beads. "Move the wounded to the barn," she says decisively. "We are a target if the plane sees fires near the house." No lights. "Use the flares only if signal fails, and get me 2 men who can walk without limping. They'll guide the parachute parties out to the wood." No one argues. Command here is not an abstraction. It is a set of choices that have immediate bodily consequences. A man stabs his fingers into a rope and hauls a stretcher. Another fills a tin with hot broth. The priest murmurs a quick prayer. Outside, the rumble of engines grows louder by degrees. A moon, pale and thin, wrenches itself free of cloud and for a single moment lights the slope like a sheet. You watch Nancy as she moves through the room, issuing orders, touching wounds, whispering reassurances. Her face is lit now and then by the brief flare of the stove or the electric blink of the wireless. Mostly, it is set like flint. There is a wound beneath her collarbone she never mentions, a shallow scar from a scrape with a blade months ago, and the lines at the corner of her eyes deepen when she squints at the pallid face of the fevered child. Later, somewhere between the drop and the dawn, between the crack of gunfire on the road and the hush of the house after the last stretcher is carried in, a young Maquisard will whisper, half in wonder and half in fear, "They say the Gestapo put a price on her head." Nancy will only laugh, a short bark, and reply, "Then we must make sure they never get it." She will not say that the price is so high that a man once offered to betray everything he knew just to claim the bounty. She will not say that she slept for 3 hours in a barn with a rifle pressed like a close friend against her chest. Out here, the rules are different. Nurse is a label, and sometimes a lie. It is the lie that keeps men alive long enough to become fighters, and the lie she sometimes wears when slipping past a checkpoint with flour on her apron and forged papers bordered with innocent hand lettering. She knows how to be small when it helps, and enormous when someone needs a spine. The engines over the ravine shift tone, a lighter, quicker staccato. The time window is passing. She glances at the wireless operator and then at the men in the barn, and the room seems to momentarily hold its breath with her. Outside, under the sky that has borne, witness to so much, the farmhouse. A simple pile of stone and slate once meant for nothing more than sheltering sheep and the odd cow, has for this night become a hospital, a command post, and a hiding place for the restless hearts of a country. You can smell the wet straw. You can hear the soft, necessary cursing of men and the two-word prayers of women. Above all, you can feel the sense that something crucial is about to happen, that the wheel of fate in this corner of France has tilted and that, for better or worse, Nancy Wake carries the lever. Marseille, 1939. The air smells of salt and tobacco, and the port is alive with the creak of ropes, the thrum of diesel engines, and the distant chatter of sailors switching between French, English, and Arabic. The city is a crossroads, restless, colorful, and oblivious to the dark tide already rising across Europe. Nancy Wake steps out from the shade of a cafe awning, the hem of her white dress brushing against the cobblestones. She carries herself with that effortless, unteachable grace of someone who refuses to be defined by circumstance. Her laughter, quick and unrestrained, turns heads as she walks, but her eyes are sharper than her smile suggests. She was born far away, in Wellington, New Zealand, raised in Australia, and, by her own measure, she's made herself a European. She writes, she travels, she observes. At 27, she is already working as a journalist for Hearst newspapers, which means she's learned the art of listening without appearing to. She has interviewed diplomats, soldiers, and men who believe they run the world. What they all have in common is that they underestimate her, until she speaks. In those days before the fall of France, her stories carry a warning few want to print, that Hitler's Germany is preparing something monstrous, that the persecution of Jews is not rumor, but fact. She's seen it firsthand. Vienna, 1933, a city of beauty and dread, where the laughter in cafes sounds forced and the air crackles with slogans. She remembers walking down a side street and seeing men in brown shirts dragging a Jewish woman by her hair. She remembers the way the crowd watched, not helping, not speaking. She had felt something ignite in her then. Not fear, but fury. That fury followed her to Marseille. By 1940, war had come for France. German columns rolled south, and the tricolour over Paris was replaced by the swastika. Refugees choked the roads, markets emptied, radios whispered surrender. But Nancy didn't leave. She had married a wealthy French industrialist, Henri Fiocca, elegant, reserved, and devoted to her. Together, they lived in a townhouse with marble floors and a balcony overlooking the sea. But while Henri believed the storm might pass, Nancy felt it in her bones. The storm was coming for all of them. When the first German patrols entered Marseille, she watched them from that balcony. Boots on stone, helmets catching sunlight, polite smiles masking occupation. She remembered Vienna again, and the woman in the street. And that old, familiar fury returned. At first, she helped where she could. A forged ration card here, a bribe there. She sheltered a Jewish family in their cellar one week, a downed RAF pilot the next. It was dangerous, foolish work. But each small act drew her deeper into the shadow world of resistance. She began running messages, smuggling escapees across the border into Spain, sometimes under the guise of a Red Cross nurse, other times as a socialite, traveling for pleasure. The Gestapo didn't suspect her at first. She was too pretty, too polite, too visible. Who would believe that the charming Madame Fiocca, who attended soirees and flirted with officers, was also feeding intelligence to London? She learned to weaponize her femininity, to play the part of a woman the enemy would never see coming. By 1941, her name, or rather her code name, began appearing in SOE reports. White Mouse. The sobriquet came from a Gestapo officer in Lyon who, after yet another failed attempt to capture her, slammed his fist on the table and growled, "The mouse escapes again." Each mission sharpened her edge. She forged alliances with local Maquis units in the Vichy zone, coordinated safe houses, and ferried couriers under the noses of German sentries. She could drink a man under the table, then walk home through curfew-lit streets without a stumble. Her handbag carried not lipstick, but coded microfilm. Her smile could open doors. Her eyes warned that stepping through might be your last mistake. Henri knew what she was doing, though she never told him everything. "I would rather not know," he once said quietly over dinner, his fork motionless in his hand. "But whatever it is, I'm proud of you." The war pressed closer. Arrests multiplied. The resistance was leaking blood. When Nancy learned that her network had been compromised, she knew she had to leave, not just for her safety, but for everyone she'd helped. She kissed Henri goodbye in the courtyard of their home. He promised he would wait. She promised she would return. She didn't know it then, but that was the last time she would see him alive. Her escape from France was a labyrinth of danger, a train through the Pyrenees, nights spent in barns, the sound of dogs in the distance. In one village, a farmer hid her in a wine barrel to avoid a German patrol. In another, a priest guided her through mountain passes at dawn. Her forged nurse's papers got her past checkpoints. The irony wasn't lost on her. They called her just a nurse, and it was that label that kept her alive. By the time she reached London in 1943, she was thinner, harder, and furious anew. The SOE debriefed her, gave her a new uniform, and tried to slot her into training like any other recruit. They soon realized they couldn't. She excelled in every field exercise: parachuting, weapons, demolitions, hand-to-hand combat. Her instructors noted that she was exceptionally cool under pressure. She joked about shooting better than the men, but behind the grin was something colder: purpose. When her commanding officer asked why she wanted to return to France, she answered simply, "Because my friends are still fighting, and because the bastards killed my husband." She didn't cry when she said it. That autumn, she parachuted back into occupied France under cover of darkness, landing awkwardly in a field near Clermont-Ferrand. She dusted herself off, adjusted her cap, and grinned at the stunned Maquis who found her. "Well, gentlemen," she said cheerfully, "you could have put out a light for me." From that moment, the legend of Nancy Wake, the spy who could outfight, outdrink, and outthink her enemies, took on flesh and bone. But before the gunfights and the sabotage, before the raids that would make her one of the Gestapo's most wanted, she had been, and still was, a nurse. Her hands had saved more lives than they had taken, and it was those hands, steady and scarred, that would soon lead an army of outlaws into one of the most daring uprisings of the French resistance. June 1944. Central France, the Auvergne region. The forests stretch endlessly, dark and restless beneath a heavy sky. Rain drips from pine needles, rifles glint under tarpaulins, and the smell of smoke clings to every coat. Here, in the high country, the Maquis have built their fortress, not of stone, but of secrecy. Nancy Wake, code name Helene, strides through the muddy clearing, boots sinking into the earth. Around her, men straighten instinctively. They are hardened partisans. Miners, farmers, deserters, even a few British operatives. But in her presence, there's something like reverence. The woman with the clipped accent and fearless grin commands them as no one else can. Her uniform is simple: khaki trousers, wool sweater, and a Sten gun slung across her shoulder. Her lipstick, always red, is her only vanity. To the Maquis, she is Madame André, the woman who parachuted from the night sky bringing weapons, orders, and courage in equal measure. That morning, she stands before a captured map spread across a tree stump. The paper is damp, the ink bleeding. A young courier reads from a coded message. D-Day confirmed. Allied landings in Normandy. June 6th. A murmur ripples through the camp. For 4 years they have fought, bled and buried friends without knowing if liberation would ever come. Now, it's here. Nancy's voice cuts through the excitement. Then we start today, she says. If the Allies are landing, they'll need us to keep the Germans busy inland. We hit the rail lines, the convoys, everything that moves. She points to the map, tapping each target with a gloved finger. We don't wait for orders. We are the orders. The men grin. They know her reputation, fearless in combat, relentless in planning, and merciless when crossed. When supplies were scarce, she stole from German depots herself. When one of her lieutenants froze under fire, she dragged him back to the fight, swearing like a dock worker the whole way. And when a Maquis unit hesitated to engage a German patrol, she had snapped, "If you won't fight, I will, and I'll tell London you're polishing boots instead of saving France." They fought that night and won. But her leadership is not built on bravado. It's earned in sweat and risk. She eats what they eat, sleeps on the same cold ground, and walks the same perilous routes. When the men get drunk, she joins them, matching them glass for glass until they fall laughing into the dirt. "You've got to show them you're one of them," she explains later. "Otherwise, you'll never lead them." The Maquis love her for it. They call her La Femme Terrible, the terrible woman, half in jest, half in awe. Within days of D-Day, her unit's operations intensify. Bridges collapse in fireballs, railway tracks are blown apart by night, convoys vanish into ambushes. Each success sends tremors through the German command. The Gestapo begins, circulating her photograph again. Black and white, grainy, labeled white mouse, extremely dangerous. One raid nearly breaks them. A German patrol surprises a Maquis column near Montmouchet. Gunfire tears through the trees, shouts echo across the valley. Nancy is in the middle of it, crouched behind a fallen log, firing short bursts from her Sten. The air smells of cordite and wet soil. Bullets whine overhead. When the firing finally ceases, dozens of Maquisards are dead. The survivors scatter. Nancy drags the wounded into cover, her medic's training surfacing through the chaos. Blood mixes with mud on her sleeves. She ties a tourniquet on a young fighter's leg, whispering, "Hold on, mon petit, hold on," before ordering the others to retreat. That night, as they regroup miles away, she sits by the fire, her face illuminated by the flames. The men are silent. They've lost friends, brothers. But she doesn't let the grief settle. "We hit them back tomorrow," she says quietly. "Twice as hard." And they do. Weeks later, with their radio destroyed in the skirmish, the unit is cut off from London. They can't call for supplies. Ammunition runs low. Morale begins to fray. Nancy refuses to give in. "Then we walk," she declares. She gathers a small team and treks 70 kilometers through occupied territory to find another resistance cell with a working transmitter. They move by night, sleeping in barns and caves by day. German patrols comb the valleys, their searchlights sweeping like white knives across the hillsides. When their bicycles break down halfway, she doesn't hesitate. She mounts one of the broken frames and pedals anyway, metal grinding under her weight, rain pelting her face. "We've got work to do," she growls. They reach their destination after 3 days, half-starved and soaked. The operator stares at her in disbelief. "You came how far?" he asks. She smiles faintly. "You could have come halfway and met me." With the radio reconnected, London sends an airdrop that same night. Crates of Sten guns, grenades, explosives, and food parachuting down through the clouds. The Maquis cheer, but Nancy just lights a cigarette and exhales slowly. "Good," she says. "Now we can finish the job." Her orders are clear. Disrupt every German reinforcement moving toward Normandy. In the weeks that follow, her unit derails trains, blows up bridges, and ambushes convoys with lethal precision. The Germans strike back with savage reprisals, burning villages suspected of harboring partisans. But instead of breaking the resistance, the terror steals it. Nancy becomes a ghost story whispered among German soldiers. The nurse-turned-commander who strikes and vanishes. Some say she leads hundreds. Others say she's an army of one. The truth lies somewhere between. By July, her network controls nearly 7,000 fighters across the region. The Gestapo places a 5 million franc bounty on her head, dead or alive. Her response, when told of it, is to laugh. "Is that all I'm worth?" she says, flicking ash into the dirt. As liberation draws closer, her legend only grows. Allied bombers thunder overhead by day, and Maquis sabotage tears through the countryside by night. France burns, but this time it burns toward freedom. And at the center of it all is Nancy Wake, the woman they once called just a nurse, now commanding an army that refuses to die quietly. August 1944, near Montluçon, France. The forest is alive with thunder. Machine guns chatter through the fog, grenades burst in the distance, and somewhere a German officer screams orders that are swallowed by the sound of battle. Nancy Wake crouches behind a crumbling stone wall, a Sten gun pressed tight against her shoulder. Her men, the Maquisards, fan out along the tree line, firing, shouting, ducking as bullets splinter bark and ricochet off rock. This isn't a raid anymore. It's a full-scale war. The Germans are retreating north toward Paris, desperate to hold what they can. But the Maquis are relentless, striking from every wood and valley. And at their head is Nancy, not hiding, not waiting, but leading. She pops up from cover, sights down the barrel, and fires. The recoil jolts her shoulder, brass casings flicking into the mud. A German truck, loaded with ammunition, lurches forward before erupting into a fireball. The blast rolls across the field, scattering men and debris. Her second-in-command, Henri Tardivat, runs up beside her, his face streaked with soot. "They're breaking, Nancy. They're running for the road." "Then don't let them get there," she snaps, slamming a fresh magazine into her weapon. "Cut them off." They surge forward. For an hour, chaos reigns. Smoke, shouting, the bark of rifles. Then silence. When it's over, the road is littered with burning vehicles and the dead. Nancy stands in the center of it, chest heaving, rain mixing with ash in her hair. Around her, the Maquis cheer, exhausted and wild-eyed. They've done it again, but for Nancy, victory has a cost. Every success brings reprisals. Villages torched, hostages executed. Each time she hears of another massacre, she feels the weight settle heavier on her shoulders. Late one night, as the camp sleeps, she sits by the fire alone. The glow flickers over her face, hard and weary. A small photo rests in her hand. Henri Fiocca, her husband, smiling in a Marseille cafe years ago. He had refused to flee when she escaped to Britain, captured by the Gestapo, executed. She traces his face with her thumb. "I told you I'd make them pay," she whispers. "I meant it." The next day, she's back in the saddle, quite literally. The Maquis have seized German vehicles, but Nancy prefers the simplicity of a bicycle. She pedals through the countryside, scouting routes, inspecting supply caches, organizing ambushes. Always in motion, always in control. It's during one of these rides that they hear it. The distant rumble of engines. A German convoy, armored cars and trucks, winding its way through a narrow valley. Nancy signals for her men to take cover. They've got one chance. She checks her watch. The timing must be perfect. Too early, they miss the center of the convoy. Too late, They're surrounded. On my mark, she says quietly. The first vehicle rolls into the kill zone. She raises her hand and drops it. Explosions tear through the air as the Maquis detonate mines along the roadside. Flames engulf the lead truck. Machine gun fire erupts from the ridges. Germans scramble for cover, shouting, returning fire blindly into the trees. Nancy moves like she's possessed, darting between positions, shouting orders, dragging the wounded back from the line. When a young fighter hesitates, paralyzed by fear, she grabs his collar and snarls, "Don't you dare stop now," before shoving him back into position. After 20 brutal minutes, it's over. The convoy is annihilated. Ammunition, fuel, and documents, all theirs. Among the spoils, they find papers revealing that the Allies have crossed the Seine. Paris is nearly free. The end is coming. That night, as they celebrate, Nancy lifts her glass high. "To France," she says, "and to every bastard who thought we'd lie down." The men roar in agreement. But behind her, laughter lies something colder. Satisfaction, yes, but also exhaustion. The kind that only those who've survived too long can understand. Days later, word reaches them. Allied forces are advancing toward central France. The Maquis are to assist, clear roads, and secure towns ahead of the main columns. It's what they've waited for. Open combat, side by side with the armies they've fought so long to support. When the first British patrols roll into the village of Montluçon, dusty and grinning, the locals flood the streets, waving flags and flowers. The Maquis march in with them, dirty, unshaven, rifles slung over their shoulders, and in the middle rides Nancy Wake, her red lipstick gleaming even under the soot. A British officer dismounts and salutes. "Madame Wake, I presume, heard about you from London." She grins. "Good things, I hope." "Mostly disbelief," he chuckles. "Didn't think one woman could run half of central France." "Then they haven't met French women," she replies, mounting her bicycle again. But even in liberation, there's no time for rest. The Gestapo remnants are still out there, and Nancy knows the war isn't done until every last collaborator is gone. She personally oversees the rounding up of known traitors, those who betrayed the resistance for German favors. When one of her lieutenants hesitates to execute a proven informant, Nancy's voice cuts like ice. "We gave mercy 4 years ago. They gave us graves." By September, France is free. But for Nancy, freedom feels hollow. The mission is over. The fight that gave her purpose, her fury, her legend. Finished. She watches the last German prisoners marched away, then turns her eyes toward the horizon. "What now?" she murmurs. The question will haunt her for years, but for now, her war, the one that began in whispers and ended in thunder, is finally done. September 1945, London. Rain streaks down the windows of a military transport jeep as it rolls past the bombed-out remains of Piccadilly Circus. The war in Europe is over. Flags still hang in tatters, shop fronts still bear the scars of shrapnel, but life, somehow, is returning. Nancy Wake sits in the back seat, her uniform pressed, medals gleaming faintly in the grey light. The streets blur by, and she barely sees them. She's heading for the War Office, summoned to discuss debriefs, commendations, and, though no one dares say it aloud, what to do with a woman who has done what generals only dreamed of. When she steps inside, officers glance up, surprised. Some recognize her face from the briefings. Others just see the decorations. The George Medal, the French Croix de Guerre with multiple palms, the Medal of Freedom from the United States. But she doesn't care for medals. She never has. The meeting is polite, perfunctory. Words like heroism, exceptional leadership, invaluable contribution float around the table. Nancy listens, nods occasionally, but her eyes are distant. Still seeing the forests of the Auvergne, the smoke curling over villages, the faces of men who never came back. When the chairman concludes with, "Miss Wake, the Crown is deeply indebted to your courage," she simply replies, "I did my job." He clears his throat. "You did far more than that." She gives a wry smile. "Then I suppose I was just making up for lost time." Afterward, she steps out into the London drizzle and lights a cigarette. The match flares, and for a moment the light catches her face. Calm, unflinching, but haunted. She draws in the smoke and exhales slowly, watching it vanish into the fog. War had made her a legend. Peace made her restless. Within months, Nancy leaves Europe behind. She travels to Australia, New Zealand, even back to France, where the streets bear her name in whispers and small-town memorials. But fame sits poorly on her shoulders. She never wanted to be the white mouse. She wanted a quiet life, something she hasn't known since 1939. In Paris, journalists hound her. They want stories, the firefights, the betrayals, the narrow escapes. She gives them little. One persistent reporter asks how many Germans she killed. Nancy fixes him with a cold stare. "Do you ask the men that question?" she says. He doesn't, but not all encounters are unwelcome. In a small ceremony, French officials present her with the Légion d'honneur. Veterans of the Maquis line the walls, men who once followed her through rain and blood. When she steps onto the dais, they rise as one, caps in hand. Nancy's voice trembles slightly as she speaks. "You called me Madame André back then," she says, referencing her code name. "You fought, bled, and never gave up. France lives because of men like you. I only did what any of you would have done, if you'd been born as stubborn as I am." The hall erupts in applause. For once, she lets herself smile, genuinely, softly. But peace never sits still for her. She returns to England, then emigrates once more, trying to settle. First in the countryside, later in London's Soho, where she takes up work as an intelligence liaison. She keeps her hair short, her lipstick red, her whiskey neat. Years pass. The world forgets the weight of the war. New conflicts rise, new names take the headlines. But every now and then, someone mentions her. Nancy Wake, the woman who outwitted the Gestapo, who led the Maquis, who rode her bicycle across occupied France. In 1960, she sits for an interview with a BBC reporter. The camera flickers in black and white as she speaks. Composed, direct, still as sharp as ever. "Miss Wake," the interviewer says, "you were one of the most wanted women in Europe. Did you ever feel fear?" Nancy smiles faintly. "Of course," she says. "But I learned early that fear only has power if you stop moving." The interviewer nods, then asks, "And what do you think of war now?" Her expression hardens. "I think it makes heroes of those who never asked to be." She never marries again, never seeks comfort or sympathy. Her husband's memory remains her compass. The reason she fought, the reason she never stopped. When asked about him, she simply says, "He died because he loved me. I lived because I refused to let that be the end." Decades fade into history. The faces of comrades vanish one by one. Nancy grows old, but her eyes, fierce, grey-blue, never lose that spark of defiance. In her final years, she returns to England once more, living quietly in a small London flat surrounded by photographs. Her Maquis unit, the chain of command. Henry's portrait. She spends her evenings nursing a gin and listening to old jazz records, humming softly to herself. And yet, even in the silence, she remains what she always was. A fighter. A woman who refused to accept limits. On August 7th, 2011, at the age of 98, Nancy Wake passes away peacefully. The news spreads quietly, like the fading echo of a radio transmission. Veterans, historians, and admirers from across the world honor her legacy. In Paris, a wreath is laid at the base of the Resistance Memorial, a single ribbon bearing her code name, the White Mouse. And somewhere in the French countryside, an old man raises his glass in the fading light. "À toi, Nancy," he murmurs, "la femme qui nous a donné la France." The woman who gave us back our country. Her story remains. Not a myth, not a legend, but a reminder that courage wears many faces. Some hold rifles, some carry medical kits, some ride bicycles through the dark, but they all defy the same enemy, the belief that one person cannot change the world. Nancy Wake did.